woman who's had so much and is now 40, nearly 44, actually keeps on going back to when I was 11, when I was 11, when I was 11, as if this is the most important part of her life. What nonsense is that?
She told it like gospel. The dish soap, the indignation, the handwritten letter. At just 11 years old, Meghan Markle claimed she stared down the patriarchy armed with nothing but a Bic pen and a sense of justice. For years, it's been her favorite fable, the sacred story that turns up in speeches, interviews, and panels like clockwork. When I was 11, it always begins the same way, a solemn tone, a performative pause, and then a rehearsed tale that's been recited so often it might as well be trademarked. But in Austin, Texas, during a 2024 International Women's Day panel, that well-worn narrative finally met its match.
Hollywood legend Brooke Shields has spoken out about her horrendous encounter on stage with Meghan Markle at the South by Southwest Festival, and it's clear that the two divas didn't get on at all.
Because sitting next to Meghan that day wasn't just another royal adjacent guest or a politely nodding moderator, it was Brooke Shields, actress, icon, and the last person on Earth who was about to let another celebrity script slide by unchecked. What happened next turned a panel into a moment and a monologue into a meme. Picture it. Meghan launches into her signature story. Her voice slows, her eyes widen. The dish soap saga returns once again, delivered with all the gravitas of a world leader recounting their first protest. The words, "when I was 11, hang in the air like a cue card. But this time, the audience isn't leaning in. They're bracing. Because we've heard this story before. At the United Nations, on TV specials, in magazine profiles, it's the tale Meghan can't stop telling, even as public patience thins. And that's when it happens.
Brooke Shields, a total legend, and she makes it so clear that she just couldn't put up with Meghan's nonsense. Now, Angela, I'm sure a lot of A-listers have felt this in the past, but don't you find it fascinating that Brooke Shields is going on the record, is prepared to now say this?
Brooke Shields, poised and smiling, gently leans in. "Excuse me," she says. "I'm so sorry. I've got to interrupt you there for 1 minute." The crowd freezes. Is this a handoff, a compliment? No, it's a curveball. "When I was 11, Brooke continues, I was playing a prostitute." The room erupts. Laughter breaks the tension. Meghan, mid-mission, is stopped in her tracks. For the first time, her bedtime fable hits a wall it can't climb. But this wasn't just comic relief. It was commentary. Brooke Shields wasn't mocking Meghan's childhood moment. She was challenging the mythology. Because at 11, Brooke wasn't writing letters. She was navigating real-life controversy as the child star of Pretty Baby, a film that ignited global debate about exploitation and consent. Her interruption wasn't meant to steal the spotlight. It was meant to shift it, away from the over-rehearsed righteousness and towards something real, messy, and human.
It happened a year ago. She could have done it then, but obviously she's sort of burst open now to say what she wanted to say for the whole year, and actually to be honest about it, tell her, will you shut up? You're talking a load of rubbish. I think that it's good of her.
What Brooke did with one well-timed quip was more than comedy. It was a call-out, a public reminder that not every childhood story needs to be repackaged as activism. Sometimes, real experiences speak louder than fairy tales. And the audience? They got it. They laughed, they clapped, some even looked relieved. Because Brooke did what no one else on that stage had dared to do. She read the room. And in doing so, she said what a lot of people have been thinking for a long time. Meghan's story isn't just overplayed, it's unraveling. But trust us, that's not even the craziest part. At first, Meghan didn't flinch. She smiled, a little tight, a little delayed, the kind of expression you flash when you've just been hit with a punchline, but can't decide if it was meant for you. But as the audience laughed and applauded Brooke's line, something shifted. The spotlight-ready grin faltered for just a moment. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. The "when I was 11" story was supposed to land. It always had, but now it had been turned on its head. And here's the thing, Brooke didn't just undercut the moment, She exposed it.
Listening to her for 45 minutes, she said, too boring for words. And she just said how awful it is that she's talking about when she was 11.
She didn't say Meghan was lying. She didn't have to. She just offered a truth so raw, so casually powerful, that it made Meghan's version feel like fiction by comparison. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about young girls finding their voice. It was about who gets to tell their story, and how often you can recycle the same one before people stop listening. But let's go deeper, because what really sent shockwaves through the room wasn't just Brooke's joke, it was the subtext behind it. For years, Meghan has positioned herself as a feminist icon in the making. A woman of substance shaped by an early encounter with injustice, destined to speak truth to power. It's a compelling arc, especially in a world hungry for women's empowerment stories, but that narrative only holds if the details do, and increasingly, the details don't. The soap letter story has already been quietly cut from a Vanity Fair cover piece in 2017 after fact-checkers reportedly found inconsistencies. Meghan's own father later claimed the letter's impact was exaggerated, saying the company never replied, and that he was the one who arranged her Nickelodeon interview. That's not activism, that's image management. And it's not just the soap saga. From carefully curated interviews to orchestrated public moments, Meghan's brand has been built on a foundation of storytelling. But what happens when the story doesn't hold up? That's where Brooke's interruption becomes more than just a mic drop. It becomes a cultural moment, a symbolic rejection of overly packaged feminism and rehearsed empowerment arcs.
Celebrities have not been prepared to express about Meghan Markle before, but Meghan Markle's going to be fuming about this one.
Because while Meghan has made a career out of telling the same childhood anecdote to bolster her identity as a changemaker, Brooke offered something else entirely: uncomfortable truth. No script, no agenda, just a raw, human moment. And that difference resonated. India Hicks, Princess Diana's bridesmaid, and a fellow panelist, later called Brooke's interruption genius. She wasn't wrong. In a world flooded with polished performances, Brooke's candor was like oxygen. It reminded the audience that real strength doesn't always arrive in a spotlight. Sometimes it speaks in a whisper that cuts through the noise. But hold on, it gets worse, because the moment didn't just throw Meghan off, it cracked something deeper, a growing public exhaustion with her one-note storytelling. And what happened next proved it wasn't just the audience in Austin who had finally had enough. In the days that followed the panel, the clip of Brooke's interruption went viral. Not just shared, dissected, memed, celebrated. The internet had a field day. One TikTok creator mashed it with a slow zoom on Meghan's stunned expression and the caption, "Brooke said plot twist." Another spliced it into a montage of every time Meghan had trotted out the dish soap story, counting them like episodes of a long-running sitcom. Twitter, or X, depending on who you ask, lit up with applause for Brooke, dubbing her the real queen on that stage. But beneath the laughs, something more telling was unfolding. A shift in how audiences were reacting to Meghan's narrative, not with admiration, not even with indifference, with fatigue. And in Hollywood, that's worse than scandal.
So she told her off, shut up. Who cares what you're doing when you're 11? I was doing much more interesting things when I was 11 and, so shut up. This is supposed to be fun. They're supposed to enjoy it. Who the hell do you think you are? It's a big one, isn't it?
That's the beginning of irrelevance. The public had started doing the math. Meghan had told this story during her speech at the United Nations. She told it during her pregnancy, during her post-royal rebrand, during her podcast press run. She told it at King's College. She told it, believe it or not, to Oprah. But what was once a charming anecdote of youthful awakening had started to feel like a carefully rehearsed monologue. It wasn't just the story's repetition, it was the timing. It always seemed to appear when Meghan needed to realign public perception, reintroduce herself to a new audience, or remind the world of her activist credentials. But with each retelling, the power of the story faded, and the questions grew louder. If this moment was so foundational, why does every version of it shift slightly? Why was it cut from her Vanity Fair feature? And if the facts don't quite match the myth, What else has been curated? And then came the podcast. Brooke Shields appeared on the India Hicks podcast not long after the panel, and she didn't hold back. In her cool, measured tone, she recounted the moment, not with malice, but with clarity. She didn't drag Meghan. She didn't need to. The truth was more cutting than any insult. "I just felt like the room needed a moment of lightness," Brooke said. "It was so self-serious, and life's more complicated than that." That one sentence hit harder than a headline, because Brooke had lived it. She'd faced global scrutiny before she could vote. She knew what it meant to have your childhood transformed into a public narrative, and yet she never tried to weaponize it. She simply endured and moved forward.
The possibility that that interaction could have taken place on stage, and if Ms. Meghan was the sort of kind, lovely, gentle, funny person that she makes herself out to be, well, her reaction to Brooke Shields after that moment would surely have been, "Oh no, it was brilliant."
Brooke's refusal to play the victim, her ability to use grace and humor in a moment of tension, was a subtle masterclass in poise. And compared to Meghan's well-worn performance, it felt real, authentic, human. But hold up, this is where it gets even messier. Because once that authenticity started resonating, it exposed something Meghan's team hadn't prepared for: the beginning of a brand identity crisis. The cracks weren't just in Meghan's story, they were in the brand she'd spent years meticulously crafting. Because that's what her public image is, a brand. One built on empathy, empowerment, and being relatable royalty. But relatability has a shelf life, especially when the storytelling starts to feel strategic. And after the Brooke moment went viral, more people began questioning how much of Meghan's activism was authentic and how much was performance. The backlash wasn't vicious at first, it was subtle, a shift in tone. Comments that used to read, "She's so inspiring," now said, "She's still telling this story?" Even fans began expressing unease, not because of what she said, but how often and when she chose to say it. The fatigue was real, and for someone whose platform is powered by moral authority, losing credibility is like losing oxygen. Here's where it gets even uglier. PR insiders started whispering that Meghan's camp was blindsided by the audience reaction. Not just to Brooke's line, but to Meghan's entire presence on that stage.
The thing about Meghan is that when someone said something about her or really criticised her, and this is one especially about being 11, she then waits to find a way to get her own back. That's what she's done, hasn't she, with her father, with the royal family.
Some claimed Meghan had asked to approve the panel footage before release, a rumor her team denied, but one that spread like wildfire. Industry sources suggested she was deeply unhappy with the viral moment, and there was talk of damage control meetings in the days after. But even the best PR team can't spin away what happened on that stage, because it wasn't a headline, it was a vibe shift. It was the moment the audience, and maybe even the media, stopped buying what Meghan was selling. Not because she said something wrong, but because she said something we've heard too many times, too perfectly, in a room that needed something else. And Brooke gave them that something else, without planning, without rehearsal, without trying to make herself the hero. The irony? Brooke Shields didn't come to that panel looking to steal the spotlight. In fact, she tried to pass it back, but the crowd had already decided, for once, Meghan wasn't the star of her own redemption arc. And this wasn't a one-off glitch in the Matrix, it was a turning point, because when a public figure clings to a story long after it stops landing, it creates a gap between the image and the person, and in that gap, audiences start to ask dangerous questions, like, what happens when you run out of origin stories? What happens when the spotlight turns and the applause doesn't follow?
People have wanted to do but haven't dared to, because she's very spiteful.
Absolutely, and I think the thing is, Brooke Shields is one of those people, she's had a huge career, she's pretty beloved overall, and I don't really think she needs anything from Meghan Markle, and I certainly don't think she needs to fear Meghan Markle in any way either.
And here's the twist. Meghan isn't just battling criticism, she's now competing with a new narrative, one that's faster, funnier, and frankly, more believable. And it all started with 6 words from Brooke Shields. When I was 11, I was... The aftermath wasn't explosive. It was surgical, the kind of reputational shift that doesn't scream, but simmers. Days after the panel, Meghan's team went quiet. No follow-up statements, no clarifications, no Instagram reels, just silence. A sharp contrast from the usual post-event media drip. And while silence may seem strategic, in Hollywood, it often signals something more dangerous: uncertainty. Behind the scenes, insiders say the Austin moment prompted serious reevaluation of Meghan's media strategy, not because of what Brooke said, but because of how universally it resonated. The audience didn't see a mean-spirited dig. They saw relief. Relief that someone had finally, gently said what they were all thinking. Enough with the performance. And that shift in tone, it bled into headlines, podcasts, comment sections. Overexposed, out of touch, stuck in a script. Meghan's narrative wasn't just under scrutiny, it was collapsing under its own repetition. But what really makes this moment pivotal isn't just the public reaction, it's what it reveals about celebrity storytelling in the age of oversharing.
You spent all of that time with him and you wrote this seminal book on Prince Harry. But I feel like he's hit a new low this week, Angela. And I mean, that's a surprising thing to say, given that there have been so many lows in recent years.
Meghan didn't lose the room because she told a bad story. She lost it because she told the same story too many times, in too many places, to too many people who already knew the ending. And Brooke? She didn't upstage Meghan. She reset the tone. She reminded the world what authentic storytelling actually looks like. Flawed, funny, unpredictable. That's why the audience laughed with her, not at Meghan. It wasn't mockery, it was relief. Relief from the performative activism, the curated vulnerability, the TED Talk cadence of a woman who always seems to be rehearsing for her own legacy. Meghan wanted to be the voice of empowerment. But ironically, it took someone else's voice to wake the room up. So where does this leave her? Still famous, still polarizing, but no longer untouchable. Because in Hollywood, power isn't just about the story you tell, it's about who still believes it. And when the crowd starts craving something real, no amount of polish can save a script that's gone stale. Meghan can course correct, she's done it before. But she'll have to start by listening, really listening, to the room she's in. Because this wasn't just a viral moment or a snarky mic drop, it was a turning point. One where the crowd stopped clapping on cue, one where the story stopped working. And in a world where attention is currency and authenticity is everything, the question isn't whether Meghan will speak again, it's whether anyone will still be listening.